What the city is talking about.
The news that impacts you.
Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast.
With Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Welcome to The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and this week we'll cover these stories. The latest numbers on inflation in Canada showed the biggest decline since June of 2021, something the Bank of Canada has been looking for to break its cycle of interest rate increases. But a deeper dive into the numbers showed food prices did not follow that pattern. We'll speak to an economist about what that portends.
And this week we asked, should kids learn about the LGBTQ plus community in school? We got a huge response. It was very divisive. And then a sex ed teacher wanted to weigh in. What she had to say was very eye-opening.
And after news of a $50 million fine over a price-fixing scandal by Canada Bread Company, there's a new concern that's arisen for consumers: food fraud. Are you getting what you think you're paying for? Too often, the answer to that question is turning out to be no. We'll speak to Dr. SYLVAIN CHARLEBOIS, Canada's food professor at Dalhousie University, to explain.
But we begin with this. The next big advance in cancer treatment could actually be a vaccine. Not the traditional kind of vaccine that prevents disease, but shots that shrink tumors and stop cancer from coming back. Doesn't that sound amazing? And they could be available within 5 years. Dr. Christopher Labos explains.
So I came across a story and I thought I had not heard anything about this. You know, whenever we talk vaccines, typically, at least for the past couple of years, it's always been about COVID and the fact that, mRNA vaccines, there are still deniers out there. And then this story talks about vaccines in a completely different way. But what's really interesting is mRNA is mentioned here as really the development that is helping, or at least helping some doctors, some scientists, treat different cancers with vaccines, something completely different that hasn't happened up until now. So we thought we'd try to find out more. Dr. Christopher Labos is a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology. He's on, by the way, Sunday mornings with Ken Connors. That's at 8:10 a.m. Dr. Labos, look, vaccines have been around obviously for a long time. And in reading about the story, it said they've been used, but the development of mRNA vaccine specifically has kind of changed the game here. Is that accurate? Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, here's the thing. We talk about the mRNA vaccines and mRNA technology in the context of COVID because that's when, the first time most people had heard about it. But mRNA technology had existed prior to this. It's just that most of the research on it was being done in the context of cancer therapy. And, it wasn't quite, it was still very, very preliminary. But mRNA technology is not new, and people had been researching it for decades. It's just that they hadn't been able to use it for a practical purpose yet. And so when COVID came around and everybody said, let's use this technology to make the vaccines faster. And it worked quite well, despite what, many people like to say on the internet now. And so a lot of people think of mRNA technology in terms of traditional vaccines, but in fact, the future of it and where most people are talking about is in terms of the use of cancer treatments. And we talk about them as cancer vaccines because that's just how we speak. But they're not vaccines in the sense that they're going to immunize you against getting cancer. It's more, if we want to think of it that way, as an immunotherapy type thing. So we would use it to sort of treat cancer to get your immune system to start killing off cancer cells, which it largely does. Your body over the course of your lifetime is going to, develop a number of little tumors, which are basically just dysfunctional cells, and your immune system is usually able to kill them off before they start to spread. It's just that with cancer, your immune system can't quite get it under control, and that's why those initial cancer cells end up growing and becoming tumors and metastasizing. So this is really about a form of immunotherapy, which itself already exists in some ways, right? Most people who have cancer will know that a lot of the chemotherapy that we talk about now would be more accurately referred to as immunotherapy, using the immune system to kill off and treat cancer.
So I have one question before. I know Natasha has a question as well, but my question is, this is in conjunction with existing therapies. In other words, you're not getting a vaccine to completely eliminate one particular kind of cancer. We're not at that stage. You still would go through your regular channels of treatment.
Right, essentially. Now, again, if you want to get really philosophical about it, there are vaccines, traditional vaccines that prevent cancer, and I'll give you a perfect example so that we don't tend to think of it in this way, but think of the HPV vaccine.
That was exactly what I was going to ask. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially a vaccine that prevents cancer. So some cancers, not all, but some cancers are actually caused by viral infections. And HPV is the obvious example. And so a vaccine against HPV is preventing, the human papillomavirus infection, which is what leads to cervical cancer in women. So that's a vaccine that's preventing that specific type of cancer. So that will be useful for certain situations. But when people talk about mRNA technology and mRNA, quote unquote, vaccines for cancer, they're really talking about delivering a specific mRNA sequence to the cell so that your body can start making a particular protein to then fight off cancer. And so they would use it as a treatment for whatever cancer you happen to have.
Could they be used in conjunction?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't. It is a different thing. I mean, also, when you go for chemotherapy, depending on what cancer you have, you don't get one treatment now. You actually get multiple different types of treatments. And let's think about breast cancer, for example. You get surgery, you get your radiation therapy, you get traditional chemotherapy, you get different medications that block estrogen levels, so you get hormonal therapy. There are a lot of things that are, in fact, immunotherapy. If we think of like Herceptin, for example, which is an antibody specifically against the HER2 new receptor. So you get multiple different treatments that attack different parts of the problem. And so there's no reason philosophically or conceivably that you couldn't use this in conjunction with anything else, depending on how successful it is. We don't really know what the ultimate potential of mRNA technology for cancer therapy is going to be. People have been talking about it for a while, but nobody has successfully used it yet.
Yeah, and of course, like so many other treatments, it depends on the kind of cancer. From what I read, Dr. Labos, this may be more effective against certain types of cancer than others.
Right, and there's also a question of, how much room do you have to improve upon? If you take something like breast cancer, just to keep using the same example, I mean, the treatments for breast cancer are already very, very good. So to show a benefit in breast cancer, you would have to be above and beyond what already exists, which is a much higher threshold than a situation like, for example, pancreatic cancer, where the treatments are not that good, where there's a lot of room for improvement. So, a lot of this is speculation. It's an easy thing to say. It's the practical realities of making this stuff work in a real clinical setting. But yeah, this is not going to be a universal solution to cancer, because cancer is not a single disease. Cancer is a grab bag term that we use for a lot of different diseases. Because if you think about lung cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, they're caused by different things. They're treated differently. They just have a common pathological mechanism, which makes us think about them similarly. But the reality is we probably should think about them differently, because they are very different diseases. And so there will never be a cure for cancer, because cancer isn't one thing.
Right, and the cancers all behave differently. I was thinking, Dr. Labos, about how the advancements that have been made, I mean, they're staggering, obviously, and yet I wonder how frustrating it is for doctors that they don't advance more quickly. Do you find that things go slowly on the whole when it comes to, again, you can't find a cure for cancer per se, but cancer treatments?
Yeah, it's obviously frustrating, because you could spend your whole career just working on one particular advancement. And, again, you have to sort of zoom out and look at stuff historically. And again, I'll just keep harping on breast cancer, because that's the example that people use. If you look historically at how breast cancer evolved over the past 50 years, there were remarkable strides in terms of the surgeries becoming less invasive and less destructive, radiotherapy going from its original formulations to fractionated radiation therapy, which was less damaging to the surrounding tissue, and the improvements in chemotherapy in terms of the development of things like tamoxifen and Arimidex and all the hormonal therapies, which are remarkably effective and have no side effects. But all of these changes happen slowly. So if you were living through them, it was very frustrating, because, when we talk about things in terms of, short term, like, is this something that's on the horizon? Yeah, we usually talk about it being on the horizon in the next 5 to 10 years. So for people who want things to happen from one day to the next, it is hard, because, and again, people I think have a artificial view of how quickly things can work. Because during COVID, we got the vaccines over the course of a year. And that was amazing. But that was literally a situation where basically government opened the coffers and said, no cost is too high. Take what you need. And they really cut out a lot of the red tape to just have the pure science. A lot of that red tape is back, and some of it is justifiable, because you want to have those safeguards and those regulations in place. But there's a lot that we could do to make the process go faster. And frankly, a lot of the most frustrating part of doing research is not the doing of the research, it's the It's the paperwork, it's the getting funding, it's applying for grants, it's applying for peer review, revising and editing your manuscripts before they get published. So things take very, very long. And it's, the comment I hear from a lot of people too is like, I wish somebody would just let me do my research and leave me alone with all the paperwork stuff. But unfortunately, it's the paperwork stuff that ends up sucking up so much of your time and is the great source of frustration for a lot of people.
I just want to ask one last thing as we run out of time here. Part of the story that I read on these vaccines and treating cancer, and as you said, there's so many things or different things that are cancer. And then I read that I think it's Merck and Moderna have teamed up and are actually working on what they call a personalized vaccine, which basically would be customized to each patient depending on what they're working with, which is, when you think about it, pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is. And again, we've sort of been working towards that. So, when you get specific immunotherapies, you get specific antibodies based on if your cancer has that specific receptor. So a lot of people have, when are we going to start doing personalized cancer therapy? We've sort of been doing it for the past 20 years, to be quite frank about you, because when they do a biopsy of your cancer, they're actually looking to see which receptors do you have and giving you the antibodies directed against those receptors. So this is not new per se. It's just that the advantage of the mRNA vaccines is they can give you a specific bit of mRNA specific to you and your cancer, in theory. And that's the great advantage of the mRNA platform, is it really allows you to sort of tailor the therapy to the specific patient, or to be more accurate, probably to a specific group of patients that have similar problems.
Informative.
Interactive.
And always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
The latest numbers on inflation in Canada showed the biggest decline since June of 2021, something the Bank of Canada has been looking for to break its cycle of interest rate increases. But a deeper dive into the numbers showed food prices did not follow that pattern. We'll speak to an economist about what that portends. We've been talking a lot lately about inflation, numbers coming out, of course, this past week showing inflation had gone down. Yet at the same time, we continue to see prices of food, and in grocery stores, of course, prices continuing to go up, which kind of begs the question, how can they both be happening at the same time, going in different directions? Kevin Headland is co-chief investment strategist at Manulife Investment Management. He's on the line right now. Mr. Headland, thanks for the time this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Let me ask an obvious question here. If inflation seems to be coming down, why do some of those prices continue to rise, and what will this mean going forward in terms of interest rates?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think for a lot of people, when they hear inflation coming down, they expect prices to fall. And actually, that's not necessarily the case. What you're actually seeing is inflation slowing means the rate of change of price increases is slowing. So you would have to see deflation in order to see prices coming down. Now, of course, as you mentioned, the main areas that people feel or see price increases is in food costs. And food costs have multiple layers of inflation in them. For example, by the time it hits the grocery stores or our tables or our restaurants, it's coming from farms and trucks to producers to packaging, and then finally to our restaurants or our stores. So there's multiple layers of inflation in there, also profit margins along the way as well. So it's hard to see food prices come down to end consumers when you have all those layers of inflationary forces pass through to the end consumer.
Yet, as I hear you describe this, the first thing that comes into my head is, we lived through the pandemic and we realized that then prices were going up because we had issues like supply chain. The price of fuel was much, much higher. We've seen both of those areas, for example, when it comes to getting food to your table, actually go down. The question then becomes, well, if they're going down, why do prices continue to rise?
Yeah, once again, those have come down, but there still is this level of maintaining of the end prices. Is it takes time for these, initial input costs to come down to end up flowing through to the end consumer. And of course, as I said, there is profit margins in some companies. What happens is they maintain price levels at these levels rather than bring them down in the future. So perhaps in some areas we may see prices come down on certain goods. Others, you might see just price stability rather than prices falling.
Okay. What I'm finding confusing is we had heard Tiff Macklin had said that, we were going to be on pause. The Bank of Canada wasn't going to increase rates, probably wasn't going to increase rates. That pause to me when it lasted a blink. There was hardly any pause. It got hiked again. Now we know we're at a 2-year low, 3.4%, and we're hearing that yet another rate hike may be coming. This part doesn't make sense to me either.
Yeah, it's very difficult to understand this when you look at the Bank of Canada and also the Federal Reserve in the U.S. Central banks are starting to be very aware that they are raising rates likely into a recession. They want to make sure that inflationary forces are completely stamped out. Bank of Canada previously had said they don't expect the 2% targets to be reached for CPI or inflation until the end of 2024. So they're looking at saying, well, we're going to raise rates one more time perhaps, then still pause. Now, so you can talk about cutting and see if those rate increases actually do continue to have an effect on inflation. Although we've seen the recent numbers come down, there is still possibility that inflationary forces get restoked perhaps through demand in the summertime and whatnot. So there is still an uncertainty there whether inflation is going to be coming down to their targets in the near term.
You know, I read a really interesting story, I think just the other day, suggesting, and I'd never really thought of this before, because typically when we look at the different elements that make up the inflation gauge, we know what they are. There's food, there's housing, transportation, et cetera. And the comment I read was that, you know what, just by virtue of the Bank of Canada raising interest rates, what it obviously does, of course, is it raises rates for mortgages. And that in and of itself, when you factor just that in, is responsible for a big percentage of the inflation that we end up with.
Yeah, it's quite a catch-22. And what happens is typically the idea that raising rates will cause some increased costs, specifically in the mortgage cost for Canadians. And we know that Canadians are feeling it on the variable rate mortgages, but also as renewals come due over the next year, 2 years, if rates are still high, of course, those renewal rates will go higher. And ultimately what that is likely going to lead to is issues with disposable income or the propensity to consume, and perhaps demand will slow. So other areas of the inflation calculation will come down through demand. You know, if you're spending more for your mortgage costs, of course you can't afford other options like going out to restaurants as much. So perhaps that will come down, and you'll see not everything from inflation come down, but the bigger aspects of inflation, particularly demand, will drive prices or the rate of change of inflation lower.
Can we talk about the role of the war in all of this? As Aaron touched on, you know, I think at the beginning of it, we understood with the pandemic, there was, supply chain issues. The war was causing supply chain issues. I'm of course, that is still the case as this drags on and on. What needs to change there for things to stabilize?
Yeah, it's a very good question. There's a lot of uncertainty there in terms of supply chains through Ukraine and Russia, and of course Europe. There's still, the issue with natural gas in Europe, and of course as they demand natural gas or oil from other areas, that is an overall drag on the overall supply-demand equation. You look at food prices and looking at the trying to identify other areas to get access to grain and wheat and other areas that Ukraine was producing. So there's a lot of uncertainty there as to still trying to find alternative sources of that supply, and that hasn't been regulated just yet, and that's why we haven't seen, all the prices aren't perhaps increasing as much, and we are seeing food prices start to come down. It does take a lag effect in terms of affecting eventually at the end consumer level.
So things are going to get worse before they get better. I mean, we can't anticipate any end to this war, obviously, but when do you think we can start hoping that things get better in terms of our pocketbooks, our day-to-day expenses?
Yeah, I think we are going to see prices actually stabilize very soon. We're looking at, again, we look at input food prices, and globally agricultural food prices seem to be coming down. And there seems to be a bit of a 1 to 2 quarter lag or 3 month to 6 month lag in terms of seeing stability in the end prices. So there seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel right now, but it still seems a lot far off for the end consumer as they're feeling the pinch in their pocketbooks for sure. But I think price stability is coming. We should see it in the near term.
I would ask one other thing, and we've talked about this before, and we know the Bank of Canada looks at this too, labor statistics, right, with respect to employment and whether beyond just employment, whether prices are going up, salaries are going up, because that's going to be an important component of the Bank of Canada's next decision. What are you anticipating there?
Yeah, definitely salaries have gone up. We know that minimum wage increases have affected the issue there. Of course, labor shortages in key areas like services drive prices higher as the power is in the employee's hands rather than the employer's hands. So that is definitely a cause to the inflation calculation. But when you look at inflation, it's based on base effects and year-over-year change or month-over-month change. And what we're going to see is that these increased costs for labor should be slowing. Again, not coming down, but slowing, and therefore we should see less impact in the inflationary calculation. At the same time, labor shortages in a lot of areas haven't gone away. That still remains an issue, and I think that's something that's more structural in nature than just a result of COVID or the pandemic. It's demographics. There's a lot of other issues why we're seeing labor shortages in especially the food services industries.
So just as a final question, would your best guess be, if you had to offer us your best guess, Bank of Canada, are we going to see another hike, or do you think we see a pause?
I would expect right now we would see another hike and then perhaps a prolonged pause, provided that the information that's coming out is in line with their expectations. But I think the key is that we shouldn't be expecting any cuts anytime soon. It's likely going to be another rate hike and a prolonged pause until they absolutely believe that inflation is sustainable at their target levels.
All right.
Oh, well.
There you go. Kevin Headland from Manulife Investment Management. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Informative,
interactive,
and always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
This week, we asked, should kids learn about the LGBTQ plus community in school? We got a huge response. It was very divisive. And then a sex ed teacher wanted to weigh in. What she had to say was very eye-opening. So yesterday, we had a very heated call-in segment about whether or not kids should learn about the LGBTQ plus community in school as part of their sex ed program. And we got a call from a sex ed teacher who had something to say about it. Before we get to her, here is a sampling of what you had to say. Let's hear first from those who were for it being taught in schools.
I think it should definitely be taught in schools, and I think it would be really inclusive for people to know about these things and be able to learn about it younger. And I'm not saying to go super in depth, but at least make people know in the right way that these things exist.
Kids are taught sexual education, aren't they? Why can't that be just a part of the sex education class?
It's better that they get informed, in the right manner, than finding out in the streets the wrong answers to their questions. I want the school to teach my granddaughter and other children the right stuff.
And then there were those who thought it should absolutely not be taught in schools.
People aren't mad that the school is teaching it because they're not teaching tolerance and acceptance and stop bullying. What they're doing, as you can see all over the internet on TikTok and social media, they're encouraging these pride parades inside the school.
I completely don't care what people are, but I do find it kind of stupid that everything sort of gay pride is so hypersexualized.
When you start talking about the difference between what heterosexual and what non-heterosexual ideas or the whole thing is, then you have to start the conversation about what is sexual attraction. And that should not be taught to any minor.
Okay.
Wow.
I'm taking a deep breath again. I had to take several during this segment yesterday. And we got a phone call from Julie CHACRA, a PhD student in youth work at Concordia. She taught sex education over 150 groups in different schools, and she joins us on the phone now. Thank you so much for your time today, Julie.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
I think you'll have a very interesting perspective on this, but first I want to know what compelled you to want to reach out about this.
First of all, hats off to you for engaging any group, let alone the island of Montreal, English-speaking Montreal, in a conversation that is so tough. Recognizing how tough it was and I remember hearing you both at the end of the call, you're holding space for a lot of really tough and polarizing commentary. People have very strong opinions about what they think is happening in a sex ed class. And so I just recognized that sometimes it's about demystifying that, and I thought I could be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I love you so seized upon it, Julie. People have this idea that completely inappropriate things are being taught to our children. That is not the case. Can you tell us what is being taught and how it's being approached?
Sure. So first things first, the Quebec Sex Ed program was revamped a couple of years ago, and they actually did a really great job. It's available online. The entire outline, we talk about healthy relationships, We talk about taking care of our bodies, understanding how our bodies work. We talk about attraction, absolutely. But one thing that people need to understand is the same way we're not going to be teaching a grade 2 student calculus, we're not going to start teaching advanced topics in sexual education to youth that's not age appropriate. So we're always considering in everything we teach or present in a school, everything is elaborated on and developed based on age appropriate expectations that are very, very highly guided by people that took a lot of time to think about this, No, that wasn't me, but the idea is that there's a lot of planning, and everything is very purposeful. The main topics, one of your callers mentioned teaching empathy and tolerance. Well, that is absolutely at the core of things, but also understanding at one point what is happening to your body, what are the changes that are related to puberty, and how do they affect the way we interact and the way we see each other. These are all important things that need to be addressed because it's happening. It's as of grade 6, the girls are a little bit earlier than boys in terms of when they hit puberty, but when kids hit puberty, there are not only physical changes, but there's psychological changes that are directly associated with these hormones that are pumping through their veins. And if we don't help them make sense of it and tell them that they're normal, then they make up their own stories. And yes, they will go to TikTok, and then they'll come and check with me and ask me things that, some questions about basic body function that, every grade 8, grade 9 student should know, and they don't. So it's not about pointing fingers and playing the blame game. One of the things that the kids tell me the most of is, I ask them, first question, who's ever taken sex ed, or have you ever had a sex talk with your parents? And one of the most common lines is, we started, but then they started to make jokes, and I didn't understand anything, so I told them I understood.
Aha. I think parents have a big part to play in this, right? And I mean, my concern, I always say, is, because people are like, well, that's my job as a parent to teach my kid about it. But like, some parents are never going to have those conversations. And then, so where do those kids get the information? How do they learn about what's happening to them?
Yeah, so you're right, and I'm the one who talked to my kids, and I don't mind even talking to my nephews and my nieces. And some people are more comfortable with topics that are taboo, that because they represent different things in different groups, and different cultural groups, and different religious groups as well, and that is totally fine. But what's important is that there is basic information that we need to understand about what's happening in our bodies at this crucial age, especially when we're interacting with others, that has nothing to do with opinion. It's just your body's changing. It's normal at a certain age that spontaneous erections happen. Yes, it's okay. You're not dying. Everything's going to be okay. And so I think some parents lean into it, and that's great. I think, I always tell the kids, go home, tell your parents that we're talking about this so you can continue the conversation. And I tell the kids also, this is not a go have sex class. This is the more you know, the better you can take care of your body. And that's proven. The places where we teach about safe sex, about prevention, where we talk about sexuality, we have lower situations of unplanned pregnancies. And, when we talk about gender-based violence, we dismantle that in a classroom when we're having conversations about what are gender roles and what are stereotypes and what does it mean to be beautiful or not, or to be a man or to be a woman, and what is the difference between sex and gender. These deconstructing these things, the kids are so eager to learn, and they're interested, and so I think it's a heck of a lot easier to teach than a lot of other subjects, personally, though don't ask me to teach a math class. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes parents need to get to know also what is actually happening in the class so that we can de-dramatize it for them as well, because they're just doing their best to take care of their kids,
I want to stop you because I think that last point is the one that a lot of people are trying to, at least I'm trying to make sense of. Why do you think, and maybe it's not a fair question, but there are parents just bothered by that? Just by the fact that they're the ones who are going to have to step in here and say it's okay or it's not okay. Some don't want to touch it at all. Others want to go completely overboard and suggest it not be discussed at all. Has it been like this for a while? Because it seems like that divide is getting bigger all the time.
Well, I think that it becomes, so a lot of opinions when it comes to what to teach our kids can be associated with, political opinions as well, and more openness and so on, and religious stances or not. But the important, teaching about, and especially, and this is another thing, you can trust parents to do a lot, and I think parents are great. I love being a parent. But the kid that needs to hear from somebody that being gay is totally, totally fine and totally normal, and you're respected in front of the law. And the kid that needs to hear that consent means what consent really means and how we need to understand that consent needs to be freely given. All of these concepts, we present them as educators in a way that is like, I don't walk in there with my opinions. And so hearing that, that I'm gay or that I'm trans or that I'm not sure who I like right now, or I don't feel anything for anybody, and how that can be totally normal from somebody who's outside is really helpful. And the kids really respond to that because our relationships aren't as complicated. For me, they know that that's my job. And when I don't know the answer, let's go find the answer together.
Great stuff.
Yeah, great stuff. I don't know how many minds will change, though.
It's the fear, though. It's the fear of what's being...
Yeah, and it's not about, I don't think that, and so that's another word that came up yesterday, was to indoctrinate. And I think that, the minute you have any type of curriculum, somebody could stand up and say, well, no, the earth is flat, or no, math doesn't make sense, or, but as a society, we've decided that education is a human right, that everyone is allowed to go to school. And as, there are people that take a lot of time to purposefully put together incredible programs that rank us among some of the best places to live in the world because our population is educated and we are well defined with rights and we have work to do. But let's not poo-poo on at one point. Let's not poo-poo on it too much. Well, what we can do though is examine how we feel about sex and sexuality, and that often will illuminate why we're so uncomfortable or comfortable with the topic with our kids.
Hey, Julie, we're out of time, but we so appreciate your time and you taking the initiative to get in touch and make sure we had this important conversation. Thank you.
You guys take care. You're doing important work. Thank you.
So
are you. Thank you.
Informative,
interactive,
and always interesting.
This is Montreal Now with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
After news of a $50 million fine over a price-fixing scandal by Canada Bread Company, there's a new concern that's arisen for consumers: food fraud. Are you getting what you think you're paying for? Too often, the answer to that question is turning out to be no. We'll speak to Dr. SYLVAIN CHARLEBOIS, Canada's food professor at Dalhousie University, to explain. It's been a while since we used the term food fraud, but that's apparently exactly what is happening now. I'm not so sure if I'm supposed to say again or still. Dr. SYLVAIN CHARLEBOIS, Senior Director at Agri-Food Analytics. He's also Professor of Faculty of Management and Agriculture at Dalhousie University. He's on the line right now. Dr. CHARLEBOIS, thanks for being back. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I brought up the story that I think we both recall a couple of years ago, maybe. We found out that some of the fish you ordered in restaurants that you thought was one particular fish, maybe cod, turned out to be another fish, the generic Mediterranean sea bass, or what now apparently is everywhere, which is a fish called branzino. That was what restaurants were doing. How widespread do you think this now has become based on what you've seen?
Well, in food service, we don't know, because this report actually has everything to do with retail, which is a big deal because when you look at results that were published by the CFIA, fish and seafood are actually doing quite well. In fact, there's less fraud in fish and seafood, but in food service, my guess it's we would get a different picture. Mm-hmm. But all in all, when you look at the 6 categories that the CFI has looked at, and those are categories that are food fraud prone, if you will. So anything that's liquid, like honey, olive oil, expensive oils, spices, anything that actually is powder tends to be a little vulnerable to food fraud. And so they actually tested over 800 samples last year, and results were unsurprising. Food fraud is on the rise in Canada. We were expecting it due to what has happened with supply chains the last few years.
So, I mean, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is they want to saving money, right? They want to sell you a more expensive product, a cheaper product for a higher price. But when we talk about, the fact that with honey or oil in Canada, I think the results were that 1 in 4 products is probably fraudulent. What does that mean, Sylvain? What does fraudulent mean? Is it a lower grade? Is it not coming where it came from, where they say it's coming from, rather? What does fraudulent mean?
Oh, it means many different things, but if you look at the report, they talk about unsatisfactory samples, which means that the content of the product doesn't reflect exactly what's mentioned on labels, essentially. And it could be provenance, it could be an ingredient that's not mentioned, it could be, for example, they found some adulteration, that they may actually have included a cheaper ingredient to reduce costs. It may be due to counterfeiting. Maybe it was a product sold as organic, but it wasn't. Those are all examples of food fraud. So we don't have a whole lot of details in terms of how many cases due to misrepresentation they found, or they don't even actually mention brands or products or places where they're bought. It just gives you an idea of what's actually going on out there.
So I'm curious, though, are we learning of this because we're better at finding it? If this has always been going on, or there's just simply more of it going on, do you think?
Well, so last year they tested 544 samples. This year it's over 800. So I've always believed that the more you test, the more you'll find.
Right.
So you kind of have to look at the big picture with the categories. So to be more specific, like honey, for example, to answer your question about honey, things have gotten worse. So the number of unsatisfactory cases is up 11%. That's quite substantial. Other categories, it's a plus 1-2%. It's not that bad. But there are some good news, though. I mean, for example, meat. Meat is often associated with food fraud. The largest, most significant food fraud case in the world was actually in Europe, and it involved horse meat. I don't know if you remember. But it was about a decade ago. Some companies actually replaced beef meat with horse meat, and in England, well, eating your horse is like eating your pet, essentially. So it was a huge scandal there, and so a lot of people associate food fraud with meat, but in Canada, with the report coming from the CFI, 99.1% of cases tested were satisfactory. So that's good news for the meat industry.
Okay, I have a dumb question with respect to honey. How do you adulterate honey?
No. My guy loves honey. So.
Those bees, man, you can't trust them.
That's the problem. Yeah.
No, but there's a huge difference.
But what is that? I don't understand. It comes from bees. So,
you may, for example, there's lots of different types of I'm just speculating here because it's not mentioned in the report, but my guess is that you may actually be buying a special honey of some sort, and they do test the DNA composition of the honey, and it ends up being a cheaper version or just a regular version of honey, for example. Because my guess is that more expensive honeys tend to be prone to food fraud, unfortunately. So that would be my guess. And of course, there are other ways to actually adulterate honey by using a cheaper ingredient with the same texture, the same viscosity. That's really what fraudulent people do, really. Oil is a big one. Right. Canola oil is often used in olive oil and people don't notice.
Right. Okay, well, that I get.
The hope is that people won't notice, right? But like honey, for example, is something we consume a lot of. I don't, but my guy does in our household. And he can tell, like he'll buy a honey and he'll be like, it's not up to its normal. Yeah. And so my question, Sylvain, is like, of course, you want to get what you're paying for, right? And you want to get what you like, what your tastes dictate. But why does it matter if it's fraudulent? Like in the bigger picture of things, why does it matter?
Actually, that's a very good question because a lot of people are saying, who cares? I just bought a product, tastes good. It's a victimless crime. Actually, it is a problem. So first of all, you're probably overpaying for your food if you're being had. But it also actually prevents new businesses from entering the market. If everyone is trying to beat the market and be low price, all of a sudden you're competing against. If you're competing against a fraudulent company, it as a startup, it's very difficult. So it basically it stops competition from coming into the marketplace. So from an economic perspective, it's a huge problem. The other problem is food safety and health. If you include an allergen into a product and the person doesn't know it, it could be a matter of life and death. Mm-hmm. That's a huge problem.
You know, the government obviously takes this seriously. I'm just wondering if it's this prevalent and we're finding out it's more and more prevalent, what's likely to happen here? Is this simply a matter of regulation, more testing? What has to happen for this to stop?
Honestly, I actually think that the CFIA is doing the right thing. Now, this report is actually a month old. Nobody talked about it. That's one problem that the CFIA has. I think they need to do a better job with communications. But generally speaking, testing, getting some data is a good thing. It's something that they weren't doing a few years ago. And secondly, they have a bureau. There's a food fraud bureau in Canada. So if you buy, say, honey, and you think it's fraudulent, you can actually give the CFIA a call or submit an email, and they'll respond and they'll investigate. So those are things that weren't being done before.
All right. Still not sure how I'm going to tell the fraudulent honey from the normal honey. The lazy bees? I don't know what that would be. All right. Sylvain, we're out of time. I thank you very much. Everybody else, be aware. I should have asked you what people can do, by the way, but as you just said, if you suspect something...
I like what you did there. Be aware. That's
be aware with a twos. Sylvain CHARLEBOIS from Dalhousie University. Thanks for the time, Sylvain. Appreciate it. That wraps up another edition of The Week That Was here on the iHeartRadio Network. I'm Aaron Rand along with Natasha Hall, and we will see you next week.
Have a wonderful week.
This has been the Montreal Now podcast with Aaron Rand and Natasha Hall.
Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6
on CJAD 800
or through the iHeartRadio app.